Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Do I Have Time For This? The series that looks at old and new video games, from indie to AAA and everything in between, to help you figure out if you've got the time to play, finish, 100% complete a game, or to just leave it in your backlog to forever gather dust. Today we're looking at possibly one of the best rags to riches stories in the indie gaming space with Maus, PI for Hire. Starting out as a tweet of a minute gameplay showing how a rubber hose animated first-person shooter would look, this game went on to receive a deluge of wishlists on Steam, eventually snowballing into a full release on all platforms and glowing reviews from everyone. Well, except for IGN. A 1930s noir-style story presented in the format of a completely unserious cartoon, Maus, PI for Hire from developer Fumi Games shows us the world of Mausburg from the eyes of Jack Pepper, a war veteran turned cop turned private detective, as he takes cases, cracks skulls, and brings the bad guys to justice in classic cartoon fashion. Performance is rock solid here on my high-end PC, but I've seen no mention of any issues anywhere on console, save for a few soft locking glitches, so it looks to be another stellar indie release. It also held up pretty well on the Steam Deck, and it released with favourable reviews on the Switch too, so you can get your cartoon mouse action on the go, no bother. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, and if you want to go the extra mile in terms of support, you can now become a channel member to get some extra perks for only $1.99 a month by clicking the join button below. Now let's grab our comically floppy weapons, massive hand-drawn anvils, and drink our finest fondue as we clean the streets of Mausburg.
Then, when you forget your midair, jump again. Works like a charm.
Gotta be the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
I'd be a fool not to mention up front the thing that got 90% of people in the door on this game when it first appeared on Twitter, the art style. Whilst the game itself grew arms and legs over time, the main thing for me personally that sold me on the game was it pioneering an old school boomer shooter with a traditional rubber hose animation style, much like I use for the Rhino on this very YouTube channel. There's something about the very intentional use of black and white alongside the noir theme that just makes everything pop. And even when you're looking at something totally ridiculous, you can still see it in a serious light. This gets me on to possibly the most surprising part of the game for me personally, how much of an emphasis there is on the story. Atypical to the usual non-existent story in a boomer shooter, there's a lot of long and somewhat drawn-out conversations with some very on-the-nose themes lampooning today's current climate. I was shocked not only to find out that this was all fully voice-acted, but none other than Mr. Video Game voiceover himself, Troy Baker, was playing Jack Pepper, the main character.
Oh, your mother's a very beautiful woman.
Beautiful.
Very beautiful.
She's beautiful.
Understand what I'm saying?
She makes me sweat in places I didn't know I had.
I mean, the things I would do to your mother.
The things I did to your mother.
Let me ask you a question.
Oh my God.
You were in there.
You know, one time you've been in there.
What's it like?
Oh my God. By the way, this your watch?
The story itself is honestly nothing to write home about. We cover the same tired noir tropes we've seen a million times, like the attractive actress coming to ask Jack for help and the corrupt cops being taken to task. By the story's end, I wasn't really invested in anything that was going on or the relationships I built throughout the game, but it's a cartoon boomer shooter, so I wasn't expecting to. You can really tell Troy had quite a bit of fun recording this one though. The dialogue is extremely heavy on the cheese puns, which I know will grate on some. But I could take it or leave it. The poor writing and excessive puns definitely got old after a couple of hours, but I was never here for a serious story or good writing, anyway. Before we dive into the actual gameplay, I want to touch on the difficulty options and visual and audio filters the game has, as I was surprised at just how much was on offer. When it comes to the difficulty, you're given the usual 3 options for easy, medium and hard, which adjust the level of enemies and damage you typically expect, but the filters are where the game truly shines. There are filters in the options menu to introduce quote-unquote noise to both the visual and audio aspects of the game, meaning you can add film grain, distortion and blurriness to the visuals, and make the sound less crisp and more scratchy like an old gramophone or vinyl, depending on what you choose. There are 4 options to pick from for both audio and visual noise, or you can customize them for how you like it. I kept everything default for the footage, but outside of that, I did put some on to see how authentic you could get it to a proper old style cartoon. We need more of this in games. Alright, let's finally dive into the gameplay here. As you'll have been able to tell from the footage so far, this is your classic boomer shooter through and through, with a big roster of weapons and hordes of different mice to blast through to reach your goal. There's a lot of emphasis on speed, with Jack having a dash unlocked from the start, but getting extra traversal abilities like a grapple, a double jump, and a few others I won't spoil that almost feel like playing a much more relaxed Doom Eternal at points. Keeping with the Doom theme, and bear with me here, the game's actually surprisingly gory, despite its cartoon aesthetic. In the environment are barrels you can shoot or pick up and throw to inflict different damage types like acid, fire, and explosive. Enemies killed with these barrels will often have a horrific death like melting to a skeleton or turning into a pile of ash, but because it's a cartoon, they do so with a pretty funny animation. On top of this, you can also drop a piano or anvil onto some enemies slapstick style for a funny finisher. It all just lends to the cartoonish gameplay style the developers are going for. Fun and slightly gory kills and fast combat aside, a boomer shooter, as I always say, lives and dies on its arsenal of weapons available to the player. And here in Mouse, I'm a bit up and down on the whole thing. See, the way this game works is it gives you weapons in a sort of burst fashion, where each new mission will give you a new weapon, then after 2 or 3 new ones, there's a very big stint where you don't get any new weapons for a long time. The weapons are incredibly well designed in a sort of rubbery, floppy way like everything else is in the game, and when you get the ability to upgrade them, they change over time, becoming far more outrageous and cartoony in a good way. I just wish the pace you got them was a bit more evenly spread out. They also get alternate fire modes as you upgrade them to keep things fresh. I do think that the more interesting weapons are kept for the last few levels of the game though, which is a shame because I'd love to have had more time to experiment with them. Apart from the Devarnisher which you get early on, most of the guns you get are just your basic firearms from your typical shooter up until the late game. You can also find some pretty funny power-ups like the spinach that gives you a super punch, coffee that gives you infinite ammo, or a chili pepper that gives you flaming bullets. One drawback with the weapons I will say is that there's no real incentive for you to switch up the weapons you use, and this is mainly due to the enemies you face not requiring certain weapon types to take them down. One example of this done right would again be in Doom Eternal, where you kind of had to keep cycling weapons to stand any real chance at taking down the numerous hordes of demons you faced, but here in Mouse, you can just upgrade 2 guns and readily switch between them whenever ammo runs out. By no means a deal breaker for me as I had my favourites, but I feel like boomer shooters have moved on a bit from the days where just having one gun be viable for the whole game was acceptable. This kind of speaks to the enemy variety in general, as there are quite a few different types, but you'll likely meet them all within the first few hours of the game. After that, they introduce reskins of the same enemies but in different outfits. Again, by no means a deal breaker for me, but I would have liked something new to fight after hour 6. The boss fights are a different kettle of fish though, as almost every boss in the game has the option of a new gimmick in the arena to take them down. Not only this, but they're also incredibly well designed and balanced, visually different and interesting compared to the fodder enemies you fight, often with their own motivations. You by no means have to use said gimmick to take them down, but it's fun to figure it out during the fight and feels satisfying to pull off and make light work of them. Now we've firmly covered the story, combat and art style, let's cover the world and the detective side of the game. Between each mission, you'll return to a sort of hub area, where you'll be asked to piece together the clues you found and hopefully provide a way of progressing to the next story beat. This is done a lot like in Alan Wake 2, with a big crime board covered in pictures and yarn that you piece together over time. I say you piece it together, but in reality it's just Jack piecing it together for you, and I do think that's what I'd love to see in a sequel. A big expansion to the actual detective side of things, with optional areas and optional story beats that you can only find through your own personal detective work. Outside of the actual hub area, you can actively travel around Mouseburg to each level very much like in Cuphead, only there's nothing fun to do except enjoy the scenery as you drive your little car, and get a feel for how many levels there are. I feel like this was a wasted opportunity here, but likely this was due to budgetary reasons. The levels themselves are entirely linear, although at some point you may get the option of an A or B path. Strangely, although there are collectibles to be found throughout the levels, if you miss them, you can actually just buy them from a vendor afterwards, so there's no massive incentive to go looking beyond your own curiosity. Most of these collectibles are hidden behind the one and only puzzle in the game, repeated to a point of nausea for me personally, the lock-picking minigame. There are 2 variations of the game, one where if you fail you lose health but can reattempt it, and one where it can't be failed. I quite liked the ones you could fail, as there were some actual stakes to them on launch, where if you didn't get it right the first time, you didn't actually get a second chance to do them. But I really wish they'd come up with another kind of puzzle, literally anything else to do. Speaking of the collectibles, one of them you can find are a set of baseball cards, which feed into a Gwent-like minigame where you match numbers and try to get your players round a field in an attacking and defending stage. It sounds mechanically complicated, but once you start playing you'll easily get it, and I really miss how games used to have these little minigames built into them. We need more of this in our games. So let's get down to it. How long does this game take? I finished every mission, found as many secrets and cleared as many side hustles as I could, and I came out at 12 hours. If you're looking to make the most of this fast-paced gameplay, ignoring minigames and just blasting through the main story, it'll take around 9 hours. Full completion will require around 15 hours or so, and you'll need a guide due to the missable achievements for level-specific criteria and how many collectibles you need to get, given you can't actually replay levels. If we're talking value for money, I'd say at the reasonable price point of £25 or $30, it's a fair asking price for the game you get here. It's non-stop fun with a reasonable story and high quality animation. If this had been priced at your typical $70, I'd say it wasn't worth it, but 12 hours feels about right for this sort of price, with no extra in-game purchases bolted on. It is worth noting though, it does appear that there is a DLC planned in the works. When it comes to respecting your time, Mouse is fairly good at it, offering frequent save points for the most part alongside some autosaves. I do wonder why the manual save points are so frequent given the game seems to save by itself after every encounter, but my guess is due to how much missable stuff there is, given you can't go back to the previous levels. I do think this kind of wastes your time if you're a completionist and don't want the game spoiled for you by using a guide. I wish they'd add the ability to return to Mouseburg and replay levels after finishing the main story. It's definitely a missed opportunity. Throughout the levels you can even open up shortcuts to previous areas, even though there's not really much point in doing so if you can't replay the levels. The option to replay missions would definitely help achievement hunters make sure they aren't having to force a second playthrough when they shouldn't really have to. If you're a fan of boomer shooters or the old rubber hose art style, I can wholeheartedly recommend picking up Mouse PI for Hire. There's something about this fun cartoon world that draws you in, with references to old movies, cartoons and games, alongside fourth wall breaks that genuinely makes you smile. Whilst the writing is pretty lame and you have to have a high tolerance for cheesy humour,
oh brother, this guy stinks!
Mouse PI for Hire gives you exactly what the team originally promised all those years ago and nothing more. A rubber hose style shooter that's fun. I do have a few gripes in terms of what I believe would be missing features were it a AAA game, but I feel like the fact it's an indie game on an indie budget and it is done this well is only worth applauding in this day and age. I wish Fumi Games all the best in making a sequel to this indie hit. I'd love to see them expand on the world, add more detective stuff and more sleuthing minigames, alongside an even larger roster of weapons. Then you'll have a perfect 10 out of 10 boomer shooter in my book. Do you have time for Mouse PI for Hire? On this channel I like to give my thoughts on the game alongside an in-depth look at the time you have to invest, because time is precious, right? If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, feel free to like and share. If you want to see more reviews, deep dives and topical videos, subscribe to the channel and drop any suggestions for future videos down in the comments. And finally, if you want to come chat with me, you can find me over on x.com/gracious_rhino. I'm Gracious Rhino, look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.